Well, welcome to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. My guest this week is Justin Kendrick. Justin is the lead pastor of Vox Church, which he founded in 2011 with a small group of friends on the doorstep of Yale University. Since then, Vox has grown to multiple locations across New England. Justin and his wife live outside New Haven, Connecticut, with their 4 children. Justin's newest book is called Bury Your Ordinary. Justin, welcome to the show. How are you?
Tim, thanks so much for having me. I'm great.
Awesome. Good to have you on. I was looking a little bit about your church and some of your old sermons and things like that. And it seems like God's doing some amazing stuff there. So tell us a little more about you and kind of how you started this journey with God. And, when did you growing up? What were your influences? That kind of stuff. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. So grew up in a very typical New England home. What I mean by that is we were non-practicing Catholics. We went to church on Christmas and Easter. Parents were divorced when I was 7. And didn't have any Jesus influence in my life at all. It wasn't until I wandered into a Pentecostal church as a teenage kid that I first really heard about the gospel and about Jesus. And my life as a freshman in high school was completely rearranged. It's one of those things, Tim, as I look back, it's like there's really no explanation other than the grace of God. I wasn't looking for God. My family wasn't pressuring me. My friends were not Christians. God just seemed to call my name. And so from high school into college, always had a focus on Jesus. I actually got to tour the world with a Christian band for 7 years out of college. And then from there, always feeling this draw to the Northeast. The Northeast is a unique place. Not too many Christians want to be in the Northeast, and not too many ministries are thriving in New England. And so really felt this drawing to see this area changed from the least church region to the most spiritually vibrant region in one generation. And so just my wife and I, we just gave ourselves to that 10 years ago, started planting churches, and people started meeting Jesus, and it's been an incredible grace-driven ride. And so we'll be here for the rest of our lives. We love it in the Northeast, and grateful to be a part of a family of faith that's just seeing miracles.
Yeah. You have 4 children. Tell us about them.
I got 4 kids. Yes. So Chrissy and I had our first when we were 23. And so we were high school sweethearts. We met when we were 16 and got married at 21. And so my oldest is a freshman in high school now. I'm 38. And so he's 15 next month. And so that's Gabriel. We have 3 boys. It's Gabriel, Noah, and Ezra. And then they're 12 and 7, the other 2 boys. And then my daughter, we started all over again, Tim. So my daughter is 2.5. She is adopted, and her mom was a prostitute. Dad's in and out of jail. Crazy miracle story. And she's been with us. She was 3 days old and finalized this adoption last spring. And so she's just like the center of the universe at the Kendrick house. But yeah, she's a gift to us, and my boys take good care of her, and that's the Kendricks.
That's amazing. I love that. What do you like to do for fun in Connecticut?
Yeah, I definitely love, all my kids play sports. That's a lot of fun, just being involved with sports with them. My wife and I love to ditch our kids and go on vacations, just the 2 of us, or do anything, just the 2 of us. So we try to do that as much as we can and still be responsible parents. But yeah, other than that, I love trying to stay healthy. I love just getting time with some of my friends, some of my guide friends, and just playing sports and being together. I love to read, so I spend a good amount of time reading and just creating a healthy pace. But honestly, I have definitely blurred the lines between work and play because I hired all my best friends, and so now we just get to start churches together. So it's kind of a dream. I'm not gonna lie.
Sometimes that can go wrong if you hire a family.
Sometimes
or
that
friends,
can go very wrong.
Not in your case, huh? That's good.
No, we're 10 years in, and it's been a work of the Holy Spirit when it comes to like these guys, all the guys on the team. I've known them for 20 years, since we were teenagers. And so that is dangerous, right? There's a lot of people that would say never do that. Don't do the dual relationship thing. And there's been a grace on it. We're very intentional with that process so that we don't smash into each other. But yeah, it's been a really sweet gift to us.
I've heard you like to go fly fishing and camping with angry chickens. Is that true?
That is so not true. Let me tell you, I went with a group of pastors. I'm from the city. I grew up in the city. I've never been fly fishing my entire life till this past spring. And I'm okay outdoors. I'm not like a guy that can't handle myself outdoors, but I'm definitely not the guy that goes and lives in a tent for a month.
Yeah.
So I did go fly fishing this past spring for the first time. And, I was a hot mess, but it was fun. I caught some fish and got it done. And,
I heard that on your sermon about fear. It was a really good sermon, but that was a funny story about
oh, thanks, man.
chicken pecking at the tent. So anyone check that out if you want to know what we're talking about. But I'm also watching. It reminded me of a show I'm watching called Alone. People just go out in the wilderness. I just started watching that. My pastor recommended it, and so I'm like, man, I could not do this, but I love watching people struggle to do it. So
totally, yeah. Me and my boys watch Alone, and it's fun. It's fun to kind of bet on who's gonna make it.
Exactly. It's like Survivor without the drama and the voting and all that. So
I don't want to blow it up for you, but if you skip to the episode where the guy shoots the moose with a bow and arrow and then lives off the meat for months, it's pretty awesome. Yeah,
I did not see that one yet.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. We're going to talk about your new book. I'm excited to do that. But before we do that, just tell us about a time in your life, since the show is about discernment and hearing God's voice and making decisions that honor him. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. But just tell us about a time in your life when you had to make a decision, how you knew it was from God, and kind of how you processed it. Because even though we may not have the exact same decisions as one another, we still all hear from God, hopefully, and try to seek him. And so if you could just walk us through a time when you had to make a decision.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we all have to make day-to-day decisions, right? All the time. And so I'll give you more of a sensational one, but it's definitely not always this way, right?
Yeah.
So I mentioned that my daughter is adopted, and we really didn't want to go the route of state foster care. There's a lot of drama with that. And so my wife and I were praying about an adoption agency, and really felt like adoption was in our future, felt like God wanted us to be a part of that. But you don't really adopt kids through foster care generally,
Yeah.
And so foster care is not an adoption agency, but I just had this burden, like there's thousands of kids all over the world that need parents, but there's about 2,000 kids without a home in the state of Connecticut where we are. And I just felt like, if we're trying to transform the cities of New England, shouldn't we be investing in the orphans of New England? And so we put our name forward. We went through a 13-class process, took about 9 months to get licensed as foster parents, always with adoption in our hearts, but no control in that, And so we go through this whole process. And right when it gets to licensing time, we had just sold our house and we were closing on a new house, buying a new house. And the closing got pushed a month, and then it got pushed another month. And so I'm praying about this whole thing. And God had really led us to this house that we were trying to buy. And we couldn't close. So for 9 months, we were living with friends, trying to transition, and our license for foster care was delayed. And the whole time I'm thinking, God, did I miss you? Why did we go through this whole process? Why was this delay? Why is our house getting delayed? I thought we were in your will, and so kind of just wrestling through, like, discerning his voice, guidance. Theologians talk about the 3 wills of the Lord: the sovereign will, the moral will, the unique will. Sovereign will is this mysterious plan that God has. The moral will is the right and wrongs that God makes clear. And then the unique will is his path for our lives. And so I was in that unique will realm going, God, what's the unique will? And so anyways, long story short, 9 months later, we finally close on our house. About 2 weeks after we close, we get licensed as foster parents. And then we get an immediate phone call about a 3-day-old little girl who needs a home. And God supernaturally knit our family with her family in crazy, unexpected ways. We're still very close with her biological family. And of course, now 2.5 years later, she's adopted and a part of our family. But the truth is, she wouldn't have been born if we had closed on our house 9 months earlier and gotten licensed 9 months earlier.
Wow.
And we would have most certainly been assigned to someone else. And so this is one of those moments where you're struggling with God's unique will, but all along his sovereign will is working itself out in the background. And so that was just one of those moments for me where, learning to take steps of faith in what I discern him doing in his unique will in my life, but then always resting in his sovereign will, that there's a plan I can't see. Like Moses said, the secret things belong to the Lord, but the things that are revealed belong to us. And so, that was just a crazy journey. There's a lot more to the story, but I don't want to take up the whole podcast, but that was just a crazy journey of trusting him. And then watching, that's one of those moments, and life doesn't always have these, but that's one of those moments where God kind of put a bow on it, and made it work, and just proved again his love and his faithfulness through it all.
That's so good. And that's one of the things where, when you look back on God's faithfulness over time, you get to see his hand working in ways you didn't see when you were in it in the moment, when you were in the
Yeah.
valley waiting for the hill to come. You're just waiting on God. And it's like, God, I thought I was in your will. Where are you? But then later on, I love it how you can look back and see God's hand on it. And that's such important when we make decisions and we think we're in God's will, but it's like, but God, you promised this, but it's not here yet. As God's, well, I'm trying to teach you something. I'm trying to show you something. I have a better plan for you if you just stay faithful to me and not go off on your own. And that's such a good reminder when we try to do things on our own. And I love how I had someone on who talked about when we try to sledgehammer open a door in our own effort, instead of waiting for God to open that door, then what happens is we have to keep that door open in our own effort after that, instead of resting on God's blessing, for the next door and the next door. And so that's such a good reminder for all of us. And, I like how you said too, we make so many decisions every day. And there's so many times when we have to kind of rest on the knowledge God's given us in the word of God and how he's grown us, because there's some decisions we have to make on the fly and there's other decisions we don't have to make on the fly and we shouldn't make on the fly. We have to rest in him. We have to wait on the Lord, and those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength, as the Bible says. And so a lot of times with the bigger decisions, we kind of have to just, trust God, even when we don't see the breakthrough coming, because we know that if we're in his will, like you said, then there will be it on the other side of maybe the struggle that we're in the moment.
Well, and it's weird because, especially in our culture and in our context, I think a lot of us struggle with delays, right? Like we think that delay is God's abandonment of us. And, I don't know, at least through the last 2 years of the crazy world that we've lived in and all the challenges we've lived through with the pandemic, et cetera. But I think that for me, in a weird way, I've been learning to really lean into the delays of God and just, this idea of detachment, getting to a place inwardly where I'm just like, God, if you're delaying something, it's cool. I'm okay with it. I don't have to push the door down because, again, this story with Thea, our daughter, is just one example of like, hey, if God hadn't brought the delay, then we wouldn't have our daughter. And so it's like, it's just a very practical way of like, stop resisting, the strategies of heaven that you can't see, and so, yeah, it's been a process in my own heart. I think all of us have this natural inclination to resist delay, but I'm actually starting to, in a weird way, like it. I hate to say that, but it's true. Like, hey, we're just going to relax. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And don't stress about it. It's going to make things worse. But, Jesus told the story of the 10 virgins who, in the delay, waiting for their bridegroom, they just lost their oil. And so no matter when the delay is in our life, we have to stay fervent, keeping our eyes on Jesus, which is the focus of this season. What do we do every day to keep our eyes on Jesus? Because there's so many distractions. There's so many things. If you look at the news or social media or the problems that we face, the finances, like we get distracted. And so that's why I love talking about what do we do every day to keep our eyes on Jesus. And so what have you found in your life that helps you keep your eyes on Jesus with running a church and having a big family and all these things that are blessings, but if not put in the proper context and putting Jesus first, can be distractions as well from our true purpose, which is following God.
Yeah, totally. It's so good. Actually, so the book I wrote is a book on discipleship and a process of discipleship. And it really talks about 7 specific life habits, and they all need to be understood in the context of grace. And maybe we'll get to that. But the first 3 habits I call centering habits. And, these aren't like theories I came up with. These are practices of my own life for the last 20 years, imperfectly, in 1,000 different ways. I don't do these perfectly, but the daily discipline of these 3 in particular have been my strategy to keep my eyes on Jesus. And so really quickly, they're pretty simple, but maybe at first they sound like, oh yeah, I heard that from my dad 25 years ago, but it's like, well, yeah, but then why did we stop doing it? So the first thing I do is I spend the first hour of my day alone with God, just being alone with God, sanctifying that first hour and setting the course of my day. That's huge for me. The second thing I do is I really look for opportunities to talk about Jesus with somebody far from God every single week. And that doesn't mean that I'm like giving them the, 27 steps of the gospel. Not that there are 27, but it just means that I'm having an intentional conversation with somebody that's far from God. And I found that that's one of the most powerful ways to keep my heart like alive in my faith. And I find a lot of Christians, they've wandered from just talking to people who don't know Jesus. And because of that, their faith's grown stale. And then the third thing is I really seek every day, and I do this in my morning time, to follow the promptings of the Holy Spirit throughout the day, just believing that that not all moments are created equal, that God has, what the Bible calls these kairos moments, these
Yes.
sacred moments, these special moments. And if I can lean into those, I can really see miracles regularly in my normal life. And so discerning the promptings of the Holy Spirit throughout the day. So those three practices of like, Lord, help me discern your promptings today. God, give me opportunity this week to just talk about you with someone, and then sanctifying that first hour of my day. Those three centering habits have been so helpful for me to just be like, I'm locked in on Jesus. I'm not locked in on all the kookiness around me.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think with talking with people too, especially in ministry, you kind of wait for them to come to you, or you may assume like, well, everyone in my church knows Jesus, or everyone in my community has heard about him before. Is like, well, no, just go and inspect that. If you really think that's true, you'll find it's not. So I'm curious, what do you do for like, finding those people? I mean, because they're everywhere, but like, do you have any strategic ways of making those connections?
I do, yeah. And every season's a little different, right?
Yeah.
And so now I'm a dad with 4 kids, and that's like the season. So for me, there's a couple of different spots that I find myself regularly interacting with people far from God. The first is through my kids' sports, right? So all my kids play sports, which means I'm stuck on the sidelines for hours every week, know? And honestly, it's just a great opportunity to build a relationship with other dads and moms that are sitting there with me. And my kids are on travel teams, so it's the same 40 or 50 people that I see all the time. And so, I mean, that's been a great way for me to just have genuine conversation about faith. It comes up pretty quickly. And I'm always looking in the book, I actually talk about how do I ignite those conversations in a not awkward way. Because if you're like me, like I'm 38, I grew up meeting Jesus and then learning like the very like salesman way of talking about Christ. And I think that that's not going to be a way that transfers in this cultural context. But, so that's one place. Another way is my neighbors. I'm really intentional to learn my neighbors' names, learn their stories, be available to them, and just be neighborly. And so we'll invite them over for dinner. We'll hang out around the bus stop, getting to know them, intentionally praying for them, being available for them. That's been really huge. And so that's been another great way for me to just build those relationships. Another way, honestly, is the gym, just going to the gym and just seeing the same guys and being able to connect. The gym I've been a part of for years, we've probably seen like 30 or 40 people meet Jesus in the last couple of years, just at the gym. And so, now it's like, it's crazy. Like I have like a whole small group of guys that eventually had come from the gym. We have guys on our staff, 2 guys on our staff now that really encountered Jesus through this one particular gym. And so that's just another way that just, builds bridges. So there's 3 that come to mind right
That's
away.
Great. But, that's great because, talking about those, when you say the mission field, you think you have to go somewhere on a specific trip, you think you have to go out of the country, but you just talked about 3 amazing mission areas in your life without having to go. And it's fine to go, but at the same time, someone might say, and I've said this before, I go to work 8 to 10 hours a day. I don't have time to tell about God. Well, you're at work in a mission field with possibly hundreds of people, and it's not that you can just talk about Jesus all the time, but like you said, don't go with the hard approach, go with the loving approach of get to know them, learn about their life. And then when they ask about, hey, what's different about you? You have joy, you have peace, in a world that's crumbling, that's your opportunity to kind of interject. So I love that. And it's such a good reminder.
Yeah. And, another one for me is the barbershop. So I go to the same barbershop, and I had the privilege of leading my barber to Jesus, right? And so he's radically saved. His family is restored. He was separated from his wife when we met. They came back together. Wow. She got baptized. He got baptized. His kids and my kids have become friends. And now there's 8 other barbers in this shop. We're like literally like just chatting it up with all of them. I'm like a every other week guy because I got to keep it fresh, and so like I'm always there, and they all know me, and it's oh, Justin, the pastor, and we're just friends, and so there's Paco, and there's Sean, and there's Javier, and there's all these guys that we've just become close friends, and they come to me. They come to me with prayer requests. They come to me with questions, and you're sitting in a chair for 30 minutes. That's a lot of opportunity just to be yourself. And so I never try to be pushy. In the book, I talk about the sergeant, the salesman, and the sage, none of which work. Sergeant is like, let me tell you that you need Jesus right now. The salesman is like, hey, for $2.99, you can be a Christian. And the sage is like, let me just give you advice, but never tell you the gospel. None
Yeah.
of those work. But there is a way to winsomely, humbly, in my city, 2% of people attend church on a regular basis, 2%, so it's the least church cities in America in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's a lot of people to talk to. It's basically
Yeah.
everyone, and so it's awesome.
That's great. And no one, you don't need to be a pastor. You don't need to have this amazing training. You just need to be available, and God will use that availability to use that to show love to people that need to hear the gospel. And so, we get in our own heads, I think, with reasons why we can't instead of reasons why we should, because as Jude says, we should be snatching people out of the fire, realizing that people are perishing without hope. And that should be motivation to just be clumsy, to be awkward, to be,
that was the word.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing. Clumsy's better. Like polished doesn't work in our context. Just be yourself and show your faults, show your questions.
Right.
Don't be afraid of not having the answer. The best answer you can give is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because why am I supposed to know everything just because I trust Jesus?
Yeah.
Isn't it okay to not know? And so it's really freeing when you just go, wait, I just should be myself. Yeah. It's the most effective witness you can be, I
love that. So the book is called Bury Your Ordinary: Practical Habits of a Heart Fully Alive. So tell us just real quick about the book. What does it mean to bury your ordinary? Where did this idea come for writing this?
Yeah, for sure. So, for a long time, I was conflicted as I looked at the clumsy, unintentional process of discipleship that I think so many of us kind of settle for, right? So Jesus said, go and make disciples, and every Christian says amen. Yeah. And then we step out and we have a plan for our diets. We have a plan for our exercise. We have a plan for our business to grow. We have a plan for our kids' education. And we don't actually have a plan for discipleship. Like, what's your plan for discipleship? Oh, well, I go to church and I go to a small group. That's awesome. I'm talking about like one-on-one, life on life, practical discipleship. And so I started this experiment as a 20-year-old kid in college with 9 guys in a 2-bedroom apartment, and just started figuring out, how do we grow spiritually? What are the ways that we grow? And, the short version is that I came to the conclusion that spiritual growth is really all about growing in love. It's really all about maturing in my love for God. It's not so much Bible verses and church attendance, although those are both wonderful. But we all know people who know a lot of Bible verses, but don't look anything like Jesus, And so it's like, that's not really spiritual growth. And so spiritual growth is growth in love. But then how do I grow in love? And what I found is over time, 7 habits really began to emerge in my own life and in the lives of those I was walking with that helped my heart grow in love. And when practiced intentionally and then even transferred to another person, the spiritual growth that occurred was exponential, because now we actually had a plan. Like, wow, we're going from habit 1, and then from habit 1, we're going to habit 2, and then from habit 2 to 3. And then as soon as you get to 7, you realize I should really go back to 1, and so it's this process of constant spiritual development and maturity. And so that's kind of how it emerged really over 20 years. So I started with me, then some friends in a house. Then we ended up getting about 12 houses in a 5-block radius in the city of New Haven, a crazy season of my life. That really expanded. And then our church, and then from there sharing it with other churches. And so it's been a really interesting journey to watch this intentional process make a significant impact.
That's really cool. And that's discernment right there, is discerning your faith and making it practical. Because how often do we listen to a sermon and we think about who else it's good for except for us, but actually to digest ourselves, what am I doing in line it up with the Bible? What are some practical ways I can live this out, instead of just, I'm going to check off my list of reading the Bible, going to church, being a good Christian. But there's so much more to that. And it's not, there's practical steps we can learn from people. It's not that I can tell you what to do. You have to go before the Holy Spirit yourself and ask, how can I change this one aspect in my life that's stale, that's not bringing any fruit? Because that's the true sign of a Christian. It's not how much theology you know, but what fruit is in your life. And theology is important and doctrine is important. But at the same time, if you just, atheists can read the Bible too and have no life in them because they're not filled with the Holy Spirit living through their life and directing their path. And so that's important too. For you talk about grace in your book, and I feel a lot of times Christians fall into one of 2 extremes with grace. Either they beat themselves up for every sin and they don't realize that grace is available, or they just misuse the grace of God in their life and they live carelessly with no discernment. And so what role does grace play in the process of discernment and this spiritual growth you're talking about?
Yeah, so important. So grace has got to be the foundation, right? The foundational revelation of identity. And so, in our world, we operate from this unspoken assumption that whatever I produce justifies my existence. And so, hey, if my book sells a lot of copies, now I'm significant, right?
Yeah.
Or if my business really takes off, or if, my wife is really attractive, or if my kids are good at soccer, whatever it might be for you, we come up with these hallmarks of our own significance based on performance. And the good news of Jesus, and I think a lot of Christians don't realize how important it is to internalize this in a deeper way, tells us that your value is not found in your performance. Your value is found in the love of God, that there is a God who loves you, not because of what you've done, but because that's who he is. Yeah. And he proved his love for you on the cross by taking your place and justifying you eternally before himself, right? Now that changes the root of my identity. So when my identity is one loved by God, when my identity is one accepted and received on the merits of Jesus, not on the merits of my own life. Now, from there, when that actually happens, you would think, oh, well, wouldn't people take advantage of grace and get lazy and not want to grow? No. When you've been captivated, truly captivated by love, the evidence that you have experienced grace is a fervent heart of obedience. And so out of grace always flows obedience. And so if a person says, well, I love grace, I love Jesus, he's forgiven me, but I don't really want to obey him. Well, then my response is, well, then you're not saved. You don't know grace. You've never experienced grace, because grace always compels you to obey. And we know this intrinsically, right? When someone comes up to you and gives you a gift, the natural inclination of the heart is to want to give them something back. Wow, how could I help you? Thank you so much, right? That's gratitude. And so the gospel inspires a heart that desires God more, not less. And so out of that experience of grace flow intentional habits to know more of God. And that's what these are all about. The problem is our hearts always run to legalism, right? And so we consistently go back to this idea, well, oh, Justin, you're telling me if I practice your 7 habits, then God's going to love me and bless me more. And it's like, well, you've actually started on the wrong foundation, right? Yeah. Everything has to begin with the fact that he already loves you and he's already blessed you in Jesus. Now, knowing him becomes the great joy of your life. And so these habits help you grow to know him more. That's good. So it's the opposite of what we think, right? I obey so that I can be accepted. No, the gospel says you're accepted, and that transforms your heart to desire obedience.
Yeah, that's so good. We do things from love, not for love. And so when we talk about our, good deeds, for example, we feel like we're off the hook. It's like God doesn't, I'm not saved through my good deeds. That means I don't have to do them. Wrong. Martin Luther says God doesn't need your good deeds, but your neighbor does. And so we should be doing these things out of the overflow in us. And, when you think about someone that just, and I've been guilty of this too, that goes to church every week and gets filled up, then there's no outlet for that to go anywhere. You're getting filled up overflowing, or you're getting beat up during the week and then coming back and needing filled up instead of, being with God keeping your eyes on Jesus every day, like we're talking about. And then you're able to then give that to other people that don't get to hear a sermon, that don't get to see God every day in their life. And so we have to remember that our foundation is built for us to go and be the hands and feet of Jesus. It's so important.
Totally. Well, and I think that one of the problems we have, because there's like 7,000 different Bible translations and 1 million different podcasts and all these different teaching and growth materials, is that for a lot of Christians, our knowledge is growing, but our application isn't. Yeah. And when knowledge grows without application, you actually fall into self-deception and you think you're things that you're not. But revelation in our lives spiritually only comes when knowledge and application grow together. And so I have to apply what I know in order for it to become real in my own heart. And so I think for a lot of Christians, this book will in some ways start to sound simple, but what you'll discover is that as you dive into the habits, because the application is now catching up, the things that you thought you believed now start to actually become real. And that's why I said a heart fully alive, because what I found is in my own life and the lives of hundreds of others, when these habits are diligently practiced, it's really hard to not be fully alive. They compel you, they draw you, it moves your heart out of legalism into grace, and you actually experience a new sense of life. I remember hearing Bill Bright founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, say one time, I've never met a Christian who regularly shares their faith and doesn't have a great fire and passion for God. And that's just one of the habits, but it's true. Like it does something in us. And that's what these habits do.
That's really good. And, we think about habits or doing things out of routine. It sounds like we're just doing this because it's on our schedule. It's a check mark. But I thought about this recently too, is, getting back to the fundamentals of Christianity, kind of like when you are in sports. I played basketball growing up. And so, when you go practice, you do layups, you run, you practice free throws, you practice passing, you practice all these things that, I've done it before. Why do I have to do it again? But if you say that to the coach, you're going to get kicked off the team. Right. And so there's so much benefit in doing fundamentals. And as Christians, sometimes, we're like, I just want the deeper things of God. I want to go deeper with God. And that's awesome. Do it, but don't neglect the fundamentals. The fundamentals are what will get you into the game and then keep you staying at performing at a high level. You get those celebrities you hear about on the news. They show up late to practice. They don't come to practice. And then they expect to be, admitted to the big game without doing the work, relying on their charisma, relying on their skills, because I have 1 million followers on TikTok, I don't have to read my Bible, all these things we justify in our own mind. And I love how you said that we have more sermons today than we've ever had. We have more knowledge, when it comes to Christianity out there, just to find when people, didn't even have the full Bible, in the past, and just having the Bible today is a miracle in itself. And so we can't neglect the fact that, knowledge is great and we should grow in our faith and knowledge, but at the same time, the application of it is so important, like we're saying.
Yeah. And, I think it's just the consistency of making those little choices every day and then watching how those choices change the way you feel inside. We can't change our emotions directly. You can't say, hey, today I'm happy. It's like, well, yeah, good luck with that, right? It's not going to happen. Right. But what does happen is habits actually indirectly inform our sense of self and then our love. And so in other words, when you start practicing these habits, you'll find that your love for God and your love for others starts to grow. And it's like, wow, I wasn't able to grow my love by choosing it, but I can grow my love through intentional practices. And so it's a powerful way to actually see change in our lives.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. All right, we're back. So you write in your book too that the discipleship model can only be understood in the context of agape. We've heard of agape love, but what does that mean practically? Why is agape love so important when we try to disciple and make disciples of others?
Yeah, I think so. Two ways of looking at it. First, all the habits that I talk about in this book, the ultimate goal of those habits is not to become an expert at the process itself. The ultimate goal is that word agape is the God type of love, the self-sacrificing love, the love that doesn't do for others so that it can receive back, but a love that does it simply out of the well of love, right? And so it's this selfless love. Human beings can taste that, but the only way we really live out of that is if we're receiving the love of God. And so every one of the habits is about growing in love. And then the last habit, which is really creating a discipleship circle in your own life, which means you're helping others grow in the 6 previous habits, right? As you start to do that, the only way to do that effectively is if agape is gotten in you, right? And so immediately, if you think like, I'm going to be this great discipler of people, like immediately the whole concept of discipleship breaks down, because it's not supposed to be about you becoming like me. It's supposed to be about us becoming like Jesus. Yeah. And so I've met so many Christians though, that I think, it's like, I'm 20 years a Christian, I'm 15 years a Christian, I'm 10 years a Christian. And Justin, I don't want to do these little practical habits. I want to know about, the Nephilim and the spiritual depths of Christianity and everything else. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But how many people have you discipled? And it's like a clear the deck question, people are like, well, not that many. It's like, well, okay, then maybe what your heart needs most is to learn to love a brother or a sister in Jesus and walk with them through their spiritual growth. And you'll grow more exponentially that way than any other thing that you do. Yeah.
That's so good. I love that. I love that. That pushback in a loving way, because a lot of times we want to go into all these crazy directions, but at the same time, there's people dying in our neighborhood, if you think of it as dying, like I said before with Jude, snatching them out of the fire, if you think about it in that way, a lot of times we just think, oh, they just made their choice, or, there's all these roads and I'm just on one road. But the truth of the gospel, if you truly believe the gospel, is that people are dying and have no hope. And so that should propel us. Even if you need to remind yourself, if there's certain people that you're praying for, don't stop praying, don't stop witnessing. Sometimes it's just a matter of prayer to get you over that. If they already know, like if you've already planted the seeds, I would say too, continue to love them, but continue to pray. Don't underestimate the power of prayer when it comes to witnessing, right? Don't do it in your own strength, like you're saying. Don't just try to muscle it in so you get all this accolades for saving all these people. Like, no, rely on the Holy Spirit to train you, to equip you, to give you the right words in the moment, when you might need it. When, I don't want to say that, we shouldn't share Bible verses, but sometimes people just need to know you're available, that you're listening, that you're ready to love them. I talk to a lot of people online through TikTok and Instagram and stuff, and I'll share a Bible verse, but Bible verses mean nothing to people that don't understand the Bible.
Trust the Bible, right?
They don't trust the Bible. So there's power in Bible verses, and people might think about it, but at the same time, they have to know, like, how does this apply to me? And you also have to be okay with planting the seeds and not seeing the harvest, because the harvest is up to God and it's in His timing. And a lot of times His timing with that is not our own. Most of the time it's not.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes planting the seeds is all we can do without seeing the fruit of it. And that's okay too, because it's in God's hands.
That's so good. Yeah. And that's the journey. And it's making those daily choices to just stretch, right? And so just to stretch out of my comfort zone. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, that, I think that the last 2 years on planet Earth has shaken all of us, that it's a unique opportunity. And it's also a danger, in the sense that I think all of us are just looking for stability, right? Yeah. Like maybe nothing can blow up for the next 3 months. That would be great. So I get that. We all want stability. But at the same time, I think that this shaking season that the world has been through exposes the lack of substance that exists in a lot of our lives. And so it's like, that's why this book was supposed to come out 6 months earlier, but I asked our publisher, could we postpone it? Because I really want to introduce it to people as a way to say, hey, this is a fresh start. Like, your spiritual life, it might be sort of like on E at this point. Maybe it's time to rethink what's ordinary in your spiritual practices and start with something new, start a fresh habit in your life. And so I do think it's a unique time for this message.
That's really cool. So yeah, that's great. The book is Bury Your Ordinary. You can get it now. And I would recommend everyone check that out. Some very practical ways to apply things to your life. Maybe not if you've heard it before, and maybe in a new way to help it be fresh and help you get the fruit of living a life fully alive in Jesus. And so thank you so much, Justin, for coming on. Tell everyone where they can connect with you and find your resources and your sermons and all that.
Yeah, for sure. So buryyourordinary.com is a website that just has some basics about the book. But the cool thing about that site, actually the thing I'm maybe as excited about the book about, is on that website, there is a free small group 8-week process. And, I know for me, doing these practices with a group is so powerful. And so encourage you, grab that 8-week small group, download it, and, just walk through the process with, 8, 10 people, 5 people in your own life, and watch what God does. buryyourordinary.com is the website. And then the church is voxchurch.org. Tons of resources about these topics, about these disciplines and sermons and stuff like that as well.
Very cool. I'll put that in the show notes. Everyone check it out. Thank you so much, Justin, for coming on. God bless you and your ministry and your family.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for listening to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. For more information on Discerning Dad, go to discerning-dad.com. Be sure to follow on all the social media platforms. Just search for Discerning Dad. Please share this podcast with a friend and leave an honest review on whichever platform you listen. Feel free to send any comments, suggestions, questions, or prayer requests at discerningdad@outlook.com. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.